Yeah, kids and students can head to their classes right now. Thank you, Tiffany. You know, somebody asked me about if our student ministry was doing the same study as we're doing, and they're not doing that right now, but he is doing a study on anxiety. So that's on Wednesday nights. So he told me to mention that if you got any parents of teens, and I know Wednesday nights are a little bit more difficult to come, especially if they don't drive, because you got to bring them over here. But he's doing a study on anxiety on Wednesday nights that you're welcome to participate in. I started this series last Sunday, and we're talking about anxiety, among other things, but it's based on a book by Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation, how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness. And I showed a bunch of charts last Sunday, and we looked at a bunch of statistics last Sunday, and I don't know, kind of what the reaction to that was, but it should be alarming to us to see there's significant increases in loneliness, anxiety, depression, and other of what Haidt calls internalizing disorders. And some mental health experts would put it at epidemic levels. Like it's a very serious issue, especially among younger generations. And it should alarm all of us. Many of us have experienced that ourselves. There's many people in this room who've experienced a rise in anxiety or a rise in depression or loneliness or whatever that is. And so you understand it's not just something that affects younger generations. We're talking about younger generations, but it's kind of using it as a springboard to talk about something that affects every single one of us. But it does uniquely affect the folks that just walked out of this room, because they were the first to grow up with the full force of what Haidt calls a phone-based childhood, and the first to go through adolescence with, in some cases, unlimited access to screens, but it's certainly the rise and the influence of technology. So they're dealing with things that we didn't have to deal with until we were adults. And one of the charts that got a lot of attention last Sunday was this one right here. It talks about anxiety prevalence by age, and it breaks it down generationally. And I want to say something to kind of both ends of the spectrum here, because I've been thinking, more this week about how this affects each of us differently. But I want to say something to the younger generations who Haidt classifies as Generation Z, and it'll also be Generation Alpha. Yes, one of the reasons that you see an increase in anxiety in those age groups is because younger generations, you are more willing to self-identify here than older generations. Older generations were taught not to talk about this stuff, not to admit it, not to confess it, anything like that. So that's one of the reasons you see the line is flat for ages 50 plus. It's because we may still be dealing with some of it, but we ain't going to tell you. And the older generations are most likely to say, younger generations are much more likely to say, yeah, this is a struggle for me. So that's a good thing. There's more awareness in younger generations of anxiety and how it affects us, and that's a good thing. Last week I said there's more willingness to self-diagnose, and that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing, because sometimes you can misdiagnose yourself. Sometimes you need to talk with a trusted professional before you start going and saying, well, here's what I got and this is what's going on and all that kind of stuff. So because with the tendency to self-diagnose is a tendency to self-treat, and again, sometimes that can be a good thing. Sometimes that can be a bad thing. It may just be you're dealing with some increased anxiety levels, and you just need some healthier screen habits, and you got to set some limits, and just practice more mindfulness and prayer and those types of things. And we're talking about that in this series, and that's good. You need to do that. But sometimes the anxiety can become debilitating, and it can affect your relationships. It can affect your emotional health. It can affect your physical health even. And in those cases, don't be afraid to ask for help. Do not be afraid to seek out and say, hey, I need some help here. I need somebody to help me work through this. We've got a ton of professionals in this congregation that are mental health professionals that can help you walk through this. And if you are a mental health professional in this congregation, I'd love to have your contact information, because I know I don't know all of you. But you can talk to any of our pastors and say, hey, I need some help working through something, and we'll get you connected to the right folks that can help you work through that. To the older generations, I want to say this. Yes, statistically, we're not as affected as younger generations. I know that is a generalization that does not apply to everyone. Okay, so I'll state that. But statistically, we're not as affected. It's not as much of a struggle. which means that we can be tempted to kind of scoff at it a little bit. The older you are, the more likely you're to go, well, we didn't have this problem when I was a kid. This wasn't going. Why are we talking all these feelings and emotions and stuff? We shouldn't be talking about this. Suck it up. That's what we had to do. Quit your crying. That's, back in my day, and we start telling, I don't know why when I'm an old person I talk like that, but we start telling war stories, right? Well, back in my day, and I might have done a little bit of that last Sunday, just a little bit. And what I'm saying is, even if you feel like you're someone that this doesn't affect, you're like, I don't struggle with this. Why are we talking about this? You should be concerned about it because we're talking about your kids and your grandkids. We're talking about people you love that are struggling with this. And as the older generations, we should want to do everything we can to learn about the world that they're having to navigate that we didn't have to navigate. And we should do everything we can to help them learn how to navigate that world. So I would encourage you, if you're somebody that's going, well, we're talking about all this stuff, try to engage with curiosity and empathy. Curiosity as to why is this happening, and empathy as to like this, these are people I love that are going through this. I'm rereading the book right now. I'm going to put that back up on the screen for just a minute. I'm about through chapter 6. Every chapter that I finish, I think, every parent needs to read this. Especially if you've got kids elementary to preteen. You need to read it because what it'll do is it'll help you put together a plan for how you're going to handle smartphones and social media. Because if you don't put together a plan, there are some highly paid people in some multi-billion-dollar companies that are putting together plans right now. And they have the front row to the seat of power, literally. I mean, there's not a whole lot going on to curb their influence and what their ability to do things. So if you don't put together a plan, other people are putting together plans. And I was listening to a podcast this morning on this, and he was talking about Hyatt's research, and I forgot the guy. It's the Good Faith podcast, but he was talking about, he compared it to big tobacco. And he was like, think back, the 80s, the 90s, when you were first starting to see this research on big tobacco, and like, look at the way these companies are intentionally targeting kids, and look at the way these companies are trying to get the kids addicted to their products and those kinds of things. And so the U.S. set some limitations. We said there's an age limit, and we recently increased that age limit. You can't use this product until this age. There's advertising limitations on tobacco companies. They can't advertise certain ways, and they can't advertise certain places. And the Surgeon General put a warning. Every product comes with a warning. And those are all good things. And they're good things because why? Theoretically, the idea is the older someone gets, the more they're able to make better decisions and, regulate their behavior a little bit better. So this is something that they really shouldn't be able to access until they're old enough or mature enough to be able to handle it, right? And we've done the same thing with alcohol. We do the same thing with gambling. We do the same thing with driving an automobile, right? You're going to get to drive an automobile one day, but theoretically, 16, you're old enough to make wiser choices and be able to drive that vehicle. You know what the rule is for social media? 13. So 13 is the law. And it's barely enforced, right? It's you just got to verify it by putting your birthday in. Okay? There's no way to prove that that's your birthday. You just put your birthday. But it's barely enforced. And 13 years old is the age in which we've decided as a society, you know what? I think 13 is probably, you're old enough at 13 to decide if you want to give your privacy away to these multi-billion-dollar companies and, chat with folks online and all that. 13, you're old enough. And I think, can you imagine if we had lowered the smoking age to 13? Like, 13, you can decide if you want to smoke a cigarette. It's no big deal. I mean, we would be outraged. We'd be outraged if we lowered the smoking age to that. But they're comparing it to the same thing. The Surgeon General in 2023 said there ought to be a warning label on social media apps. And this is, that's not, it didn't pass. It's not actually on the social media apps. But he wrote something that was it was a social media, it was called Surgeon General's warning or advisory on social media usage. You can Google it and look it up. This was in 2023. And then somebody sent me this week something that he wrote in January of this year, because the Surgeon General is going out. He served 2 terms and going out. And he wrote about what he feels. It's called his parting prescription for America. My parting prescription for America. And you can look this up too. But he wrote about what he feels is the greatest risk to public health today. And he didn't talk about tobacco, and he didn't talk about gun violence or any of these, public health risks. What he talked about was, technology. And this is what he said. Technology, despite all its benefits, has trapped many of us in digital silos with less face-to-face contact. The idea of approaching someone you don't know to strike up a conversation, calling a friend to say hello, or opening up about your struggles feels increasingly uncomfortable. Social media has turbocharged a culture of constant comparison that often undermines our self-worth and makes us feel dissatisfied with our lives. The decline of civic institutions has made knowing where to go for community harder. And underneath these trends, the pendulum of self-reliance has swung so far to one end that needing others is seen as a sign of weakness, leading to a vicious cycle of stress, isolation, and more stress. And what he's writing about is exactly what Hyatt's writing about in the book. And it's exactly what, was in the Atlantic. I posted that on my social media feed this morning or yesterday or sometime. But it's what lots of folks are writing about. One of the 4 foundational harms of smartphones and social media, excessive usage, was the loss of community and the loss of social connections. In other words, the more we used social media, the less social we became. And Hyatt goes in and explains why that is, because it feels ironic. It feels like, wait a minute, these things were designed to connect us, so why are they not connecting us? And he said they're actually doing the opposite, because in the early days, social media was a social networking tool. It was you connected with friends, maybe folks you went to high school with, maybe folks you went to college with, and you got to see, what they were having for dinner, or they posted about what books they were reading, or what movie they went to, or who they're rooting for in the Tennessee-Auburn game, or whatever, that was it. It was just you were connecting with friends, but then they introduced the like button, and they introduced forward-facing cameras, and they introduced the algorithms, and they quickly moved from social networking to social platforms, where you don't interact with friends as much as you interact with brands, content creators, and influencers. Just look at your feed if you don't believe me. It's less and less friends and more folks you don't know who are trying to sell you something or trying to get you to do something or trying to get you engaged in some way. And here's what Hyatt says about it. Now, we can remember, the folks in this room can remember a time when social media was about social networking. Our kids can't remember that because they never experienced it in that way. Here's what Hyatt says. The Great Rewiring devastated the social lives of Gen Z by connecting them to everyone in the world and disconnecting them from the people around them. Now, he's saying something profound here, and we're probably going to revisit this statement in next week's message, because next week's message is about presence. Today is about community, and these things are going to go together. But the devices that we have literally connected us to everyone in the world, while disconnecting us from the people around us who are usually the people we care the most about and love the most. But we're increasingly disconnected from them, and especially disconnected from friendships, while being connected to all of this other information. So statistically, this was in the Atlantic this week. We're spending less time eating out, less time going to the movies, less time going to theater, less time going to live sporting events, less time meeting up with people for drinks or coffee or whatever, more time in our homes, more time alone, more time doing things by ourselves, things that we used to do in community, like practice our faith or go to work. Now we're doing much more of that alone by ourselves. And it should alarm us, all of it. The statistics, what we read in the book, what we read on the online, all of this stuff should alarm us and cause us to ask, what do we do about this? Like, how do we, I don't want to say fix it, because that implies that there's this, I'll get rid of the phone. And I've already had some teenagers going, you got to stop talking about this, because my parents, they're already taking this to the nth degree. I'm not talking about taking away the phones. That doesn't really solve the problem. And because the phones are going to be there. They're a part of our lives. And listen, I like my phone. I'm glad I got it. I use it every day. This morning I checked the weather on it. I checked some scores. I read the news. Checked my balances on the bank account. I do some of that. I like having my phone. I enjoy it. But we got to know how to, basically with any of the things we have in our lives, how to moderate its usage so that it doesn't affect us negatively. We got to learn how to regulate our behavior a little bit and how to set some limits and cut back on things. And if it's hard for me as an adult, it's especially hard for adolescents to figure out how to regulate that stuff. They don't know how to regulate behavior anyway. And so now you ask them to regulate behavior in this area. It's very, very difficult, and we got to figure out some way. So it's not about getting rid of the phone, but how do we address it in some way that helps us be healthier spiritually, healthier emotionally, and all those kinds of things? And I think a couple of suggestions, and that's where we're going. We're going to the answer. I know I've spent a sermon and a half on the problem. We're getting to the answer. All right. I think one of the ways that we do that is we have to remind ourselves of God's plan for us. People all the time go, God has a plan for me. God has a plan for me. And we all want to know what God's plan for us is for us. God's plan for us is community. God did not design our faith to be practiced in isolation, and God did not design our lives to be lived in isolation. His plan from the beginning, from the creation of mankind, his plan was that we would practice life in community. One of the very first things God said in the Genesis story was, it's not good for man to be alone. And it's just not good for people to be alone. And so he created us for partnership. He created for us for relationship. He created us to be in community. And it's all throughout the Scriptures. Now, the Scriptures are never I can't pull a verse out and say, well, here's a verse right here that says, put down your phone and practice community. There's no verse like that, okay? There's no verse that commands, you got to practice community. But there's verses through every segment of Scripture from Old and New Testament that talk about the value and the need and the benefits of community. In the wisdom literature of the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. He's talking about why you need other people in your life. He continues, if two lie down together, they'll keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. You move into the New Testament, and in the epistles in the New Testament, the writer of Hebrews says, let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up the habit of meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. We need community because we need encouragement. We need other people to encourage us. There's going to be times that we don't feel very loving, and there's going to be times that we don't really feel like doing good deeds. We got to have people in our lives that are encouraging us to keep going and don't quit, and encouraging us, and we're having a tough day or a tough week or a tough year, that are a source of encouragement for us. Because the more we go into ourselves and the more we go into loneliness, it just kind of spirals. And you get into that anxiety spiral without somebody in your life to kind of help put the brakes on that and say, no, you're not thinking clearly here. This is not you. We need that in our lives. In Corinthians, he talks about this, and I'm not going to read this whole passage because I'm going to run out of time, but he's talking about how the body is made up of many different parts, and he's talking to a fractured community in Corinthians, and he's trying to explain to them God's plan. And God's plan is the many form one. And there's diversity within that body, and that's a good thing. Diversity is a good thing in any type of community, because you've got a diversity of thought and diversity of experience and diversity of background and all that's coming into this, that's forming a strong community. And one part of the community can't say to the other part, well, because you're not like me, I don't need you. Because you don't think like me, I don't need you. Because you don't vote like me, I don't need you. Because you don't believe like me, I don't need you. And this is where he talks about all of this, and you can read it. It's most of chapter 12. I want to skip down to the last part there. 2 parts there. One thing he says there is, but in fact, look at that second line. God has placed the parts of the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. And again, we're talking God's plan. God's plan for us is community. I mean, he's placing us in community, wants us to be in community. We're created for it. We're called for it. This is the other part of it I really like, that God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it. So there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. Here's the value of community. He says it right here. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Now you are the body of Christ, and each of you is a part of it. And all of these verses, we honestly don't need a deep dive here, because all of us intuitively know we need community. We know the value of it. We've experienced the value of it. We've been in communities that have helped us spiritually or helped us mentally or helped us physically. We've been in those communities that we felt enriched by being a part of those communities. We know God calls us to it. We know God created us to it. Here's the problem. It's becoming harder than ever to practice it because our culture is not really wired for it anymore. And it's much easier than ever before to say no to it while thinking we're not really giving anything up. Like, I don't need to go there. I'll just connect with them online. You don't need to call me. Text me. Tell me you hadn't thought of that before. Like, just don't call me. Just text me. But we're kind of, our community, our culture is wired for less community. And it's easier to say no to those relationships. And I'll give you a quick example. When we were going out to Arizona, and don't worry, it's not a Sedona trip, okay? Not a Sedona story, but we were going out to Arizona on the airplane. Jenny and I hardly ever sit together on an airplane. Maybe we sit in the same row, but I like the window seat, she likes the aisle seat, so we're never sitting beside each other. If we're sitting on the same row, there's a stranger in the middle, and it's always awkward because we're like, y'all know each other? Like, y'all want to sit together? No, we're fine. But on a Southwest flight, that means we just, every man for themselves on a Southwest flight, even with my whole family. Like, just pick your seat, wherever you want to go. So I take the first window seat, and we were going out to Arizona. The first window seat was 3 rows back. I sat down. There was a lady on the aisle. I sat on the window seat, and we just both kept our heads down and prayed, while everybody else was boarding the plane. What were we praying for? Nobody sits in the middle. We're praying that nobody sits in the middle because God forbid I had to talk to somebody in that middle seat. And this lady sat down in the middle seat. And that's fine. She pulled her book out. The two ladies started talking to each other a little bit. I pulled my phone out, set it up on the, ready and put my AirPods in, and I was watching a movie. And about an hour into this flight, hour and a half in this flight, this lady does something that's shocking. Okay, shocking. By modern sensibilities. Like, there ought to be a rule against it somewhere in the flight. Like, how people do inappropriate things on flights? This lady did something in the middle. She's in the middle seat, did something shocking. I got my earphones in. I'm watching this movie, and I look out of the corner of my eye. I look at her, and she is turned towards me, and her mouth is moving. Like she's saying something. And I got the universal sign for don't talk to me in my ears. Those earphones are screaming, don't talk to me. But I'm looking at her out of the corner of my eye like, I think she's trying to talk to me. And I took my earphones out and I said, excuse me? She said, I was just wondering where you was from. You can't ask me that question. That's what do you well, I'm from Nashville. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from out west. I'm headed home. So what are y'all going to be doing out west? Somebody's got to, I press the button, like somebody's got to stop this lady. She's trying to have a conversation with me, and I don't want to have a conversation. Do you remember when it was normal to have a conversation on an airplane? Do you remember that's what you did when you sat down beside somebody on a plane or a bus? You just had a conversation with them. That was a normal thing to do. Nobody would think it was weird. If you're waiting in the DMV for your driver's license, instead of everybody looking at their phone, you might have just said hello to the person and asked them who they were, where they're from and all that, where they live. Like, that was normal to have those conversations. It was normal to know who your neighbors were. It was normal if they were on their front porch. That was the sign to go over and say hello. It was normal to go out, if they're outside, to go talk to them. It was normal to hang around for 30 to 45 minutes to an hour after church and talk. Remember when you were a kid? I know I'm telling war stories again, but just hang with me. Remember when you were a kid and you're waiting on your parents to quit talking after church? And they won't quit talking after church because they're doing what? Practicing community. And you're just like, when are we going to go to lunch? You know what my mom used to do? My mom, I remember this on several nights. We go to church on a Sunday night, and we leave church on Sunday night, and home is only 2.5 miles, 3 miles away. And she goes, let's go visit somebody. And we would go drive over to somebody's house. It's usually Aunt Jane's house. We'd go drive over to somebody's house and knock on the door, unannounced, our family of 5, and say, we just coming to say hello and visit. We just wanted to see how y'all's doing. Can you imagine somebody doing that today? Can you imagine sitting at your house on a Sunday night at 8 o'clock and somebody knocks on your door and goes, "We just coming to visit, see how y'all's doing"? Well, you'd call the police. You'd be like, "I don't know who these people are, but I didn't invite them over here." It's so rare today. Now, we do have that relationship with our neighbors, and I love it. But I realize it's rare. It's rare to have that to where people are just going to drop in anymore. It is so rare. But what that is community. And here's the dilemma we're in as a society. We know we need it, but it's gotten so weird to practice it, we don't know how to practice it anymore. We just don't even know how to do it anymore. We don't know how to talk to people that we've never met before. We don't know how to have conversations with people anymore. I mean, can you imagine? Now, I was kind of freaking out when this lady was talking to me, and I'm just joking a little bit, but make sure he's in class. Can you imagine if it was my son? He would be completely, he would just freeze up like, I don't know you. I mean, he wouldn't know what to do. Sometimes kids that age don't know how to talk to their friends, in real, like they sit in the same room and text them. So it's become very, very difficult to practice community. But here's the dilemma. I got to give you a solution real quick here. We know we need community. We know God called us to it. We know God created us for community. We know we need it. But it's harder and harder than ever to practice it. So what do? We've got devices that are pulling us away from community. So what do? Well, here's my practical application. All right? If you think about it, it's easier than ever and harder than ever to practice community. Let's talk about the easy part. I start to thinking about this week, like, what are the communities in my life now outside of my phone, but they're actually true communities in my life that I'm a part of, and it's people that I have a shared interest with, shared belief with, shared value with, a shared goal with, or something, and these are impacting my life for the better. I'm going to give them to you real quick, 4 of them. One of them's my religious community. This community right here. You're looking for community? Got 52 opportunities a year to practice community. You actually got more than that. If you want to do small group, if you want to serve on a team, if you want to get your kids to go to youth group, if you want to, come to the children's ministry events, you got multiple opportunities to practice community. My parents decided that for me before I was even born. I don't remember myself going, I think I'll go to church. My parents, they had me in church since I was born, right? And I'm glad they did that for me because they decided this community is important. This community is worth investing to. This community is something I need. And I got a picture up here of Hope Center graduation. And you guys, I don't have to preach to you about community. You're living it every day, right? You're living in a house with 25 other guys. That's community. And it ain't easy sometimes, right? No amen. No loud amens. It ain't, somebody gets on your nerves sometime, right? But those are the brothers that are holding you accountable. Those are the brothers who are going to pray with you when you need to pray. That's the value of community. That's why we need religious community, because religious community is going to help us create spiritual habits in our lives and encourage us to do things when we're not strong enough to do it by ourselves. Because if you're sitting by yourself, that temptation to use is a whole lot stronger than when you're in a group of guys that are all trying to live the same way. That's true for all of us, whatever we're battling. Okay? Second community is a civic community. All right, 15 years ago, some friends invited me to a Rotary Club. Have you guys ever been to a Rotary Club or a Kiwanis or Lions or any of that kind of stuff? If you've never been, the first time you go, it's weird. All right, it's weird. They we sing a song. Who stands up and sings songs anymore? We sing a song. We recite a creed. They have birthday bucks and happy dollars. It's just like they got all these little weird, we do a toast. It's weird. There's weird rituals. But I just kept going and I kept showing up. And you know what? We eat together every week with the same group of people sitting at the same table. We pray together. We serve together. Those civic clubs, those civic institutions, always looking for new members. Always. Just like churches. Churches open all the time. We're always looking for new members. Those civic clubs are always looking for new members. And there's something powerful about being a part of a community that's focused on serving the community, because these are service-based organizations. They're focused on getting scholarships for kids and, cleaning up the Duck River and all these different projects that they're engaged in. There's something powerful in that. So that community's meant something to me. The third one was this community. my softball community. Now, this is going to be unique to every one of us because this is a community, not that my parents got me into, but my kids got me into, right? Because my kids played softball, and they enjoyed it, and they were having fun. And they, when Lily was 4 years old, we went to Mount Pleasant and played rec ball. And they asked for parent volunteers, and I said, sure, I'll coach. The only thing I knew was that the ball was yellow instead of white. That's all I knew about softball, but I was sure I'll coach. And 20-plus years later, I'm still in that community because it means something to me. Like, we made great relationships in that community. We made great friendships in that community. We had great memories of, going on the weekends and playing ball together and going to these tournaments and playing ball together. I mean, we had great relationships in that. And sometimes people miss this. Some parents, our society has taught us that, parents tend to think this is about the kid's performance. No, it's not about the kid's performance. It's about the relationships you're building. Don't make it about the kid's performance. Just enjoy the ride because it won't last forever. And this may be dance, this may be theater, this may be band, this may be swimming, this may be football, this may be basketball, whatever. But I mean, that's a community that's sitting right there to get involved in. And you're like, well, my kids don't play any sports. I guarantee the PTO's looking for memberships. I guarantee the booster club's saying, come on, we can use some volunteers. You want to work in the concession stand? You know what? Some of the best memories I had were working in the concession stand because you're just building community with people and just spending time with people. Here's my last one. I got to wrap this up. That's my gym, game time. And you go, well, that's just the gym. That's where you go to work out. Yes, it's where I go to work out, but it's a community. Because here's what happens. I work out with the same people 3 or 4 times a week. So you start to get to know those people. And you start to get to know one another. And pretty soon you spend just as much time talking and catching up during the workout as you do actually working out. Now, we're there for a common goal, but we're there, to improve ourselves, to get better physically. But that becomes kind of a little bit of a family to you. And you start to see them. And you know what people do at that gym? People stay for an hour after the class is over and talk. Just like at church. I mean, like, you can't get them out of there. They're still sitting there talking. And then we got Christmas parties we do together. And if somebody's having a baby, they're going to have a baby shower for them. Or somebody's getting married, they're going to celebrate that. Or we're going to do this. We do this thing called Game Time Olympics. Like that, we just have these social events and social gatherings that we're getting together and doing because it's more than a gym. It's a community. Now, we're there just like church. We're here to improve ourselves spiritually. We go to gyms to improve ourselves physically. But what happens in the process of improving ourselves spiritually or physically is we form community. And interestingly enough, that's how you do those things. Now, here's the hard part of it. And as I told you, it was easy, hard. All these places are looking for members. I guarantee you Game Time will sign you up tomorrow if you want to go. It'll cost you a little bit. I guarantee the Rotary Club will sign you up. It'll cost you a little bit. Church will sign you up. It won't cost you a thing. Okay, well, we do like you to give, but it doesn't cost you anything. We're not going to charge you anything. We're not going to send you a bill. But they're all looking for members. There's book clubs in town looking for members. There's whatever interest you got. I'm looking for a hunting group, or I'm looking for whatever interest you got. They're looking for people to be involved. Here's the hardest part of it. You got to show up. You got to show up. Drew does this thing at Game Time called Never Miss a Monday. And the idea is, what you're trying to put in is, you got to show up and do the work. If you want to get better, you got to show up and do the work. Never miss a Monday. And I could extend that to never miss a Sunday for church. And I could extend that to never miss a Thursday for Rotary. So I mean, like, you got to show up and put in the effort to build the community. Because communities aren't built by accident. They don't just happen. They aren't just spontaneous. They take work. Relationships take work. And the biggest part of the work is just showing up and being consistent and saying, I'm going to be here. When I don't feel like being here, I'm going to be here. When you don't feel like me being here, I'm going to be here. I'm just going to keep showing up and putting in the effort and doing the work to build community, because that's what it takes. The opportunities are sitting there, but you got to show up and make it happen. And this is the same, parents. The opportunities are sitting there for your kids, but you're going to have to encourage them to do it, because they ain't going to want to do it. They ain't going to want to do it. You're going to have to push them to say, no, call and see if they want to come over and y'all hang out for a while. Or no, go to youth group. No, go. You'll like it once you get there. You're going to have to push them a little bit, encourage them a little bit, because that's what it takes, is showing up, putting in the work. Signing up, showing up, putting in the work. Because we can't say we desire community. We can't lament the fact that we just don't have community anymore if we aren't willing to put in the work, if we aren't willing to just show up. And so that means we're going to have to take the earphones out and talk to somebody. And we're going to have to teach our kids how to, put the phone down, and we're going to have a conversation right now. We're going to eat dinner together and have a conversation, or whatever that looks like. It's not easy, but we got to do it. We have to figure out how to do that to kind of restore some sanity in our lives and restore some. And sometimes, listen, I'll say this, and I'll wrap this up. If we're talking social situations, awkwardness is guaranteed. It will be awkward to call somebody and go, "You want to go to coffee? I was just seeing if we want to go talk." Or it's going to be awkward to call some friends and go, "Hey, we want to see if y'all want to go out to eat tonight." Or, "Hey, we're going to watch a ball game at our house tonight. Y'all want to come over and watch the ball game?" Awkward. I promise you, the first time your kid walks in youth group, awkward. It's just built in. Community's built in, and that you got to push through the awkwardness and form the relationship because it's worth it. Let me pray. I'll mention this real quick. Step 1 is coming up. This is kind of the last week to talk about it because it starts next Sunday. It's the event's next Sunday, so sign up for that if you're interested in that. And let me pray for us and we'll be dismissed. Next week we're talking about presence. These go hand in hand. I know I just pulled the thing like, okay. You just said pray, and then here you go talking again. I've been waiting for 5 minutes for you to be quiet. Next week's about presence. So this week's about the need for community, and then once you get to the community, be present, because we'll talk next week. Let's pray for real this time. God, we thank you for your plan for our lives, and we thank you for what you created us for. Well, you created us for other people, and created us for friendships, and created us for relationships, and those are difficult. Those are hard. They're not always easy to maintain. They're not always easy to start. And I just pray you help us to kind of push through the awkwardness and to stay with it and to stay encouraged, because we know that it's worth it. Whether we're, building a community around something our kids love to do, or we're building a community around getting better physically, or we're building a community around getting better spiritually, that we know we need these groups in our lives. We know we need these relationships in our lives. So help us to go from this place and to build those. And it's in the name of your Son, Jesus, we pray these things. Amen. All right, see you next Sunday.